Hi everyone, welcome to What Is This Weapon? And this is, well, on the one hand, really recognisable, the MP43, 44, STG-44 family, all very similar. This happens to be, let me show you, it's actually marked up a little bit faintly, but it is MP43/1. So at one time, this was the only significantly different variant of that family of weapons, unless you count things like sight rails added later, but most people don't. You can actually go back and check out an earlier video of ours going through the variants of the MP43 family, 44, etc., where we focus on those differences with the /1. Here, the relevance is they've taken an older in-service Sturmgewehr, which is its name, overall, becomes its name later, famously granted by Hitler himself. But very clearly, something quite funky has happened to the front of this. And in fact, all of those recognisable 43/1 features have gone, replaced by some interesting goings-on. So one of my colleagues has just referred to this as a hockey puck. It's not far on. We'll try and let's give you a front-on view of that without pointing it directly at you. I know that unnerves people. It does me, actually, weirdly. So it's not solid. It is, in fact, well, it looks solid from the front. But if we look at it from the back, it's actually a steel ring with an insert that appears solid from the front with a fairly large, a much bigger hole than is necessary for the 7.92 caliber round. And then in the back, we have these great big vents. So I'm sure some of you are already trying to work out what that means. And then the other major change, well, the barrel has been turned down here and it is bright metal. The bayonet lug is still on there. And they've added this, well, there's essentially the gas block has been bypassed. This is normally the gas block. And a new one is part of that same assembly. So those veins that fill in the holes, as it will, create the 4 holes that you just saw, are a part of that same machining. And then a tube is attached to that, which enters the former gas block, as it were. And then we have a great big rod. We'll take this apart and show you the differences in detail in a moment. But if I push on that, that's what's going on. So this isn't attached to this block. This is now just passing through it. This may as well not be here. So let's move in quickly and have a bit of a closer look, because this gas block setup is interesting. So ignore this. Ignore this. This doesn't even fit, or it hasn't been fitted at least. This is an MP44 pattern gas block. It's just floating around on here. Does nothing. Ignore it for the rest of this video. Now you can see a little notch there, and another little notch there. So remember those. And then the glaring thing here is this half a bayonet lug cut from the front of an MKB42 brackets H gas block. The early type that we don't have, because we have an MKB42 brackets H, but we don't have one with the integral bayonet lug, which is normally sort of twice that length and integral to its version of this gas block. So longer story shorter, what they've done here is cut that piece off that gas block and sleeve it, interference fit, over this portion of this MP43 /1 barrel, because that's its original barrel most likely to this gun. Sleeve it over, and that blocks the gas port and means that you're not piping hot gas out of a hole that you're not even using for this design. This has been converted to this completely different system. So they seem to have used, unless this bit was somehow used for mounting a test rig, which I doubt, they've simply used a convenient found object in the workshop to press that on over the barrel and block the gas port. That's what this is. And you won't see a bayonet lug on any issue rifles. Might have been on some of the troop trials, MKBs, I can't recall, but it's not part of the design in the future. And just, I said remember those notches. Well, if I just offer up this intact MP43/1, you'll see that the barrel is in fact the correct length, and here the correct diameter for the 43-1 barrel. And those pin notches I pointed out, one here and one here, they correspond to the front pinning on of the gas block on the 43/1, and the rear sight pin notch again on that type. So the barrel is definitively that of a 43/1. They've just turned down the front of it and blocked the gas hole with this random piece that was lying around. And we can, well, the barrel's in the middle. The barrel itself protrudes through that hole, which is why it's larger than the bore. So if I grab it like that and pull it back, that's its full travel. And you can see that that's operating the bolt back there. So between angled holes in the puck at the front and solid rod driving the bolt carrier back, some of you have probably figured out what this is. This is a prototype gas-delayed blowback conversion of a Sturmgewehr, or a MP43-1 technically. So before we take this apart, who did this? So this is the work of Gustloff chief engineer, Gustloff being a design facility and factory. Gustloff chief engineer Karl Barnitzke, forgive my pronunciation, German friends. And he's responsible for a number of different designs, a little bit more on that later. This does not appear to be in any way related to the autumn 1943 development of the Gerät, I'll use English, 06, which becomes the 06H for half-locked. That's that whole set me H&K story, that follow-on from the MP44 series. It's not to do with that, which for those of you who aren't aware, they discovered that the piston that had previously been driving that prototype, if you changed the angles and with the rollers that locked it, just so you only needed that to keep the weapon shut for as long as the pressure needs to drop, and you could do away with the gas piston, and that's where your G3, MP5, that whole family comes from. This is not related to that, so forget everything I just said, basically. So just before we strip this down, you can see through the ejection port there's something weird going on. The bolt is missing its usual protective finish, although they don't always have that. But you can see some ugly scarring there, which I'll show you in detail in a moment. So normal, almost normal field stripping applies to this. But of course we have to be able to get the bolt out, which is in theory a problem on this one. But the back half works the same way. There goes the pivoting trigger group there. We can ignore that. Now, in order to get this apart, we actually have to, if I can, pull out this pin, which I'm guessing when it was being tested was properly sort of pinned in place so as not to come out, because we have to be able to detach this sliding item here. So there's that assembly I was talking about. And it is just a flat plate at the front and that sort of four-leaf shape. There's no complex angles or anything in there that to speak of. And that means that our bolt carrier group can come out the back as normal-ish. And there's that huge, great big operating rod permanently attached to the bolt carrier. And the bolt itself, the reason for that, what looks like a sort of scarring there, that's where it's been welded pretty roughly. The bolt's been welded to the carrier and then they've ground off those welds. For those of you who haven't seen the inside of an MP STG, Let's not mix these parts up. Now, of course, no need to decouple the front from the operating rod, because there isn't an operating rod per se. There is a piston. And you can see I'm having to hold the bolt to the carrier because that's normally how it works. It is locked up in the receiver, so this ledge here keeps the bolt locked, and then as the gas piston is driven back, a little hook pulls up the back of the bolt and the whole thing can come to the rear. That allows the pressure to drop to a safe level, the gun doesn't blow up, you get maximum pressure out the front, which is what you want. So this is a conventional, what we call a long stroke gas piston. So the bolt has to be separate from the carrier, but the carrier, like the Kalashnikov from later on, is attached to a piston. Just like the piston in your car engine, side by side there, you see what I mean. So they have, in the locked up position, welded these two things together. Lots of weld, lots of grinding, and then the piston's been replaced by this operating rod. Quite a simple conversion. So there's no tilting going on, the bolt's no longer locked at all, it's free to move. So how do you keep that breech closed till that pressure has dropped? Well, it's all to do with how this is shaped, how much surface area there is, and all sorts of other complicated physics things that I'm not qualified to talk about. But essentially, you'd have to balance the gas pressure exerted on this with the chamber pressure of the round so that it doesn't immediately come open and cause you problems, but you don't have it so delayed that it doesn't get its energy drops to too low a level and it doesn't come far enough back to actually operate. So in the middle there is a sweet spot. There's one other sort of technical aspect here. So this spring here in the buttstock, if you know the STG, you'll be thinking that looks weird, because the conventional spring is a single strand of steel. This is a double strand. The spacing of the coils is different. The strength, the spring strength exerted is greater with this. I think you can probably sort of intuitively understand why you need a stronger spring in this system. You need that extra additional spring force to get the bolt back forward again with that system. And how do they do that? Well, that's an MG42 recoil spring. So they literally just dropped an MG42 machine gun spring into this assault rifle because this wasn't sufficient. So really, you can think of this as a muzzle brake. In modern firearms, well, not just modern firearms, some older firearms and certainly tank guns and artillery, a brake is there to counteract recoil forces. So it pulls the gun forward, or it's pushed forward by gas pressure, pulling the gun forward against the recoil. But here it's not being used to make your shoulder more comfortable from recoil, it's being used to delay how long it takes for that whole contraption, to start coming back, opening up, extracting, ejecting, and then coming back with the MG42 spring to close it up again. So it's muzzle brake technology adapted as a way to actually operate your firearm. Now, one of our first ever actually, technical manager, it was called John Henshaw, sadly no longer with us, but he was a bit of a gun wizard and an engineering wizard and a tool maker as well. And he assessed this as non-functional in its present configuration. So not the right balance of the system to actually function. There is actually an adjustment capability of sorts that seemingly still didn't work, but there are actually two holes drilled in the operating rod up here. So you saw it earlier assembled with the pin through this block, through that front hole, so maximum extension, but you can adjust how this operates to some extent. We put that fully forward and we move the block to the second position, so the rod is sticking out the front, and we then put our pin in back there. Now that's only about a centimetre difference, but if you were to put your pin in through that hole, that sort of foreshortens the whole system and changes its balance slightly. So, but John still thought that, presumably, that neither of those operating positions would work reliably, that the bolt would have started to move well before the bullet left the barrel, regardless of how this thing is set up. Now that assessment is, I don't know that John knew this, but that was borne out by the little bit of history we do have on this thing. So there was a sort of committee, or a weapons committee, assessing new designs called the Sonderkommission Infanteriewaffen, sorry. And that took place August the 29th and 30th, 1944. So we can place this as kind of June, July 44, presumably, ready to exhibit. So they exhibited it to the officers and engineers present. There's no suggestion it was ever test fired. They discounted it almost out of hand as not necessarily that it wouldn't work technically, because you could obviously make it work technically, but because it wasn't going to save any cost or difficulty of manufacture over the conventional MP44, as it was called at the time. So it was, well, I was going to say parked, but it wasn't parked, it was kind of chucked off a cliff. Effectively, it doesn't go anywhere. The prototype languishes somewhere in the store until it's picked up by the Allies, for obvious reasons, later on. So Barnitzka is responsible for another delayed action weapon, that's the Volkssturmgewehr. So this was designed as a very cheap rifle, firing the same cartridge as the assault rifle, the Sturmgewehr, for the, well, either very experienced, very old fighters, or the very inexperienced young people that were called up as the Volkssturm to try to defend the Reich as the Allies close in. So he had a somewhat successful design, although I don't think it was particularly well liked in that delayed system. Now that was a gas bleed delay, where the hot gases are getting bled off inside the action against an angled surface to keep the bolt shut for longer. That's more like what you'll see, well, they did it on the, funny enough, on the Volkspistole stamped sheet metal pistol. We have one here, one of the designs anyway. And the HK P7 from much later, Hans Gruber's preferred pistol from Die Hard, that uses gas bleed delay to keep the slide shut for long enough to function. So that's the lineage there, the Volkssturmgewehr through to things like the P7. Essentially not related to this, except that the Volkssturmgewehr was by the same designer, but he's using a different system. And that's a much more compact system. You don't have a great big weight hanging off the end of your gun. You don't have to mess about with all of this, basically. But this was clearly a proof of concept. Let's just see how well this works. Can it be adapted to a cheapened form of the assault rifle, the Sturmgewehr? And the answer was no. So if you want to read about this, I got my information from Hans-Dieter Handrich's book, excellent book, Sturmgewehr, exclamation mark. It has a subtitle as well, which we can put that in the description for you. That is a sort of one-stop shop for everything to do with the MP43, 44, STG-44. And this object features in there, and I think that's the only definitive information on it that exists. If you do know more, let me know. There is a bogus name for this thing, STG-43/1, which seems to have been made up. It's in a book somewhere that someone scanned and put online. I think that's a sort of weird portmanteau of STG, which is later than this anyway as a name, and then 43/1, which the base gun is, I don't know. But it's not what it's called. It's the Gustloff MP508. Thanks for watching, guys. If you'd like to see a little bit more behind the scenes with these videos, you can head over to TikTok, where we now have an active channel. So do check us out there. Otherwise, the usual things apply. We have 3 museums you can visit if you're in the UK. We have our website that you can look at. Especially keep an eye on the events program, because there might be something coming up in the next month or so that you might like to come and check out at one of our sites. But whatever you do, join us here again next week.